My name is Angela Williams, and this is my story. I never thought I'd be writing something like this. But after what happened to me, I realized I had no choice. My name is Angela Williams. I'm from Kenya, a single mother of two, doing my best to keep our lives together. But on February 15th, 2025, everything changed. That night, I was driving home from work when I got into a terrible accident. The doctors later told me that my heart stopped for 6 minutes and 48 seconds. But what I saw during those minutes changed me forever. Jesus showed me something about poverty, about the truth behind white people's struggles. It shook me to my core, and I need to share it. The day my life changed, forever. February 15th, 2025, started like any other day. I had been working 2 jobs ever since my husband left 2 years ago. Life wasn't easy, but I was doing everything I could to keep my children fed and safe. That evening, after finishing a long shift at the hospital where I worked as a nurse, I was exhausted. My feet ached, but I still had to pick up groceries and make dinner for my kids. That was my life, a constant fight to hold everything together. At around 8:30 p.m., I got into my small car. The streets of Nairobi were still busy, the traffic lights reflecting on the wet pavement from the earlier rain. My mind was racing. Unpaid bills, groceries I still had to buy, my son struggling in school. I was so lost in thought that I didn't even see the other car coming, until it was too late. A deafening crash. My head snapped back, searing pain shot through my chest. And then, nothing. Everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was floating above myself. I could see my own body slumped over the steering wheel, blood trickling down my forehead. People were rushing toward the wreck, and the sound of sirens grew louder with each passing second. I watched as the paramedics pulled me from the car and started working on me right there in the street. One of them, a young man with kind eyes, was whispering a prayer under his breath as he worked. But the strangest thing? I didn't feel afraid. I didn't feel any pain. Instead, a deep sense of calm washed over me, as if I were being cradled in something warm and protective. A soft light began to surround me, and the noise of the chaos below started fading away. I felt weightless, as if I were being gently lifted, drifting farther from the wreckage. And then, I saw it. A tunnel of light. This wasn't any ordinary light. It wasn't coming from one source. It was alive. It pulsed with warmth, radiating peace in a way I had never experienced before. I felt myself being drawn toward it, and I didn't resist. Somehow, I just knew this was where I was meant to go. A deep, overwhelming peace filled me as I floated closer. I wasn't afraid of dying anymore. If anything, I felt more alive than ever. The moment I stepped into the light, everything changed. The chaos of the accident disappeared completely. I was now standing in a vast space bathed in soft, golden light. But this wasn't just light. It was living, pulsing gently as if it were breathing. The overwhelming sense of love and peace brought tears to my eyes. And then I realized I wasn't alone. To my right, a figure began to step forward. At first, I couldn't see his face because of the brilliance surrounding him. But then, he spoke, and the moment I heard his voice, my very soul trembled. "Angela," he said, his voice deep and full of authority. "Come to me." It was Jesus. I knew it instantly, even before I could fully see him. His presence was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, powerful yet gentle, loving yet commanding. As he stepped closer, his face became clear. His eyes were deep, filled with compassion, and his smile radiated warmth. "My child," he said softly, "you are here for a reason." I couldn't find the words to respond. Overwhelmed by the sheer holiness of his presence, I dropped to my knees. He reached out and lifted me up. His touch was soft, yet strong, and the moment our hands met, every fear and burden I had carried disappeared. Jesus began to walk, and I followed him. We weren't standing on solid ground. It felt as if we were walking on pure light. And as we moved, I realized something incredible. I could feel his thoughts. He wasn't just speaking to me with words. He was communicating directly with my soul. "You have questions," he said. "Yes, Lord," I managed to say, finally finding my voice. "Why am I here? Why is this happening?" Jesus stopped and looked at me with kindness in his eyes. "You have been chosen," he said, "to see what is coming and to share it with my people." We continued walking through the tunnel of light, and suddenly, the light around us shifted. It was no longer just light. It became visions. I saw flashes of cities, New York, London, Nairobi, Tokyo, all alive with movement. People filled the streets, surrounded by wealth, towering skyscrapers, luxury cars, designer clothing. But something was wrong. Their faces were blank. "Why are they like this?" I asked. "They are spiritually starved," Jesus said. "They have everything the world says they need, but their souls are empty." Then, as I looked closer, I noticed something. Many of the faces staring back at me were white. I felt a wave of confusion. "Lord, I always thought poverty mostly affected people of color." Jesus shook his head. "Poverty isn't just about money, and it has nothing to do with race. What you see here is a different kind of poverty, one of the soul. These people have been led to believe that wealth and success are enough, but inside, they're starving for something deeper." He stopped walking and turned to me, his eyes filled with sorrow. "They have forgotten me," he said. "They think success will fill the emptiness in their hearts, but in chasing after it, they've cut themselves off from me. And without me, they will always feel lost." Suddenly, I saw flashes of families sitting at dinner tables, silent, each person glued to their phone, barely acknowledging one another. I saw wealthy families in large, beautiful houses, yet their hearts were heavy with anxiety and fear. "Lord, why are they so lost?" I asked. Jesus sighed. "Because the enemy has blinded them. They've put their faith in money, status, and comfort, but not in me." Then, he showed me something even more heartbreaking. I saw churches filled with people, yet their worship felt empty. Their prayers were routine, their faith surface level. They had turned their relationship with God into a habit rather than something real and alive. "They don't truly know me," Jesus said. "They know about me, but they don't know me." He stepped closer and placed his hand on my shoulder. "Tell them," he said gently. "Tell them to seek me, not the things of this world. Let them know that true abundance comes from me, not from what they own." I nodded. "Yes, Lord." And then, everything started to fade. The last thing I saw was his face before everything disappeared into light. The first time Jesus spoke to me, his voice wasn't just something I heard, it resonated deep within my soul. It carried both undeniable authority and an overwhelming sense of love. The moment he said my name, I felt completely exposed, not in a way that brought shame or fear, but in a way that made me feel truly seen, truly known. Every wound, every mistake, every hidden fear, he saw it all, and yet, his love for me remained the same. "Angela," he said again, his voice steady and calm, "you are here for a reason." My knees trembled beneath me. Why would he be speaking to me? I wasn't anyone special. I was just a single mother from Kenya, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. My life was messy, full of mistakes, broken relationships, and regrets that weighed heavy on my heart. "But Lord," I whispered, my voice shaking. Why me? Jesus smiled gently. Because you understand struggle, he said. You have walked through the fire, yet you have not given up. That is why I am showing you this. You will recognize the truth in what you are about to see. He reached for my hand, and as soon as our fingers touched, we began walking. But we weren't walking on solid ground. It felt as if we were moving through the air, surrounded by a warm, radiant light. His touch erased my fears, yet at the same time, I could feel the weight of what was coming. You will see things that may unsettle you, he said, his gaze steady and full of understanding. But do not be afraid. What I reveal to you will not be easy to accept, but you must share it. We walked for what felt like minutes, though I knew time didn't work the same way here. Then suddenly, the light around us began to change. It dimmed, growing colder, and the peacefulness I had felt started to fade. A heavy, oppressive presence filled the air. I could sense it before I could see it. Jesus tightened his grip on my hand. Do not be afraid, he said. I am with you. And then the visions began. The first thing I saw was a vast city. It could have been anywhere. New York, London, Nairobi. It felt both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. The streets were packed with people, each moving in their own direction, going about their day. But something felt off. I noticed the exhaustion on their faces. Their eyes looked empty, their expressions lifeless. Some were dressed in expensive clothes, stepping out of high-end stores. Others sat on the sidewalks, hands outstretched, hoping for spare change. The divide was obvious. The wealthy passed by the poor without so much as a glance. But it wasn't just about money. There was something deeper. Do you see it? Jesus asked. Yes, I replied, but I don't fully understand. Jesus lifted his hand, and suddenly my perspective shifted. Now, I wasn't just seeing their outward appearance. I could see their spiritual state. I saw wealthy businessmen in tailored suits, but their souls looked empty and withered. I saw people sitting on the streets with nothing, yet their spirits radiated light. The world judges wealth by possessions, Jesus said, but I look at the heart. Then, I saw something that stunned me. I saw white families standing in food lines, children with hollow eyes and thin faces. I saw entire communities of white people living in struggling neighborhoods, barely making it. It confused me. I had always thought poverty mainly affected black and brown communities, but here it was, white families suffering too. Why is this happening to them? I asked. Jesus looked at me, his eyes filled with sorrow. Because they built their lives on shifting sand instead of solid rock, he said. They put their trust in the systems of this world, not in me. The enemy deceived them into believing that wealth equals security. But when those systems collapse, and they will collapse, they are left with nothing. I saw white families huddled together in cold, dark homes. They had food, but no peace. They had jobs, but no sense of purpose. They were surviving physically, but starving spiritually. I saw churches filled with white congregations, singing worship songs, but their hearts were far from God. Their faith had become routine, more about appearances than true connection. They have forgotten me, Jesus said. They seek comfort in the world instead of in my presence, and that is why they suffer. Then Jesus revealed a powerful truth to me. The real roots of poverty aren't just about money or lack of resources. At its core, poverty comes from a loss of spiritual identity. I saw how the enemy had distorted people's understanding of wealth and success. In some places, poverty was driven by greed and corruption, where leaders hoarded wealth while their people suffered. But in other places, especially in white communities, poverty wasn't about money at all. It was a deep, spiritual emptiness. The enemy works differently in different places, Jesus explained. In some areas, he creates poverty through corruption and injustice. In others, he creates poverty through spiritual blindness. I watched as people tirelessly chased careers, wealth, and social status, yet their souls remained empty. I saw men working long hours to provide for their families, only to feel lost and disconnected at the end of the day. I saw mothers striving to create perfect homes, yet feeling unfulfilled inside. They've confused material wealth with true abundance, Jesus said. They believe money will bring them peace, but true peace can only be found in me. Then Jesus showed me the church. I saw pastors standing at the pulpit, preaching about prosperity, telling people that God wanted them to be rich and successful. But the people listening weren't being filled with joy or purpose. Instead, they were growing more and more hollow inside. They've misunderstood my blessing, Jesus said. Blessing isn't about money. True blessing is peace in the heart, strength in the spirit, and a deep connection with me. Then, Jesus showed me how the enemy had turned success into a trap. The more people gained, the emptier they felt. The rich man walks away sad, Jesus said, because his heart is tied to the world, not to me. And then he revealed why this hidden poverty was affecting white communities so deeply. They built their lives on an illusion of security, Jesus said. For generations, they believed success, education, and power would protect them. But the systems they trusted are now falling apart. I saw white families gathered in their homes, watching the news, reports of failing banks, governments in turmoil, and rising crime. Fear was written all over their faces. They had built their lives on the belief that hard work would bring security and stability. But now, everything they had trusted in was slipping away. They put their trust in governments instead of me, Jesus said. They relied on financial markets rather than my provision. They followed human wisdom instead of my word. I saw people holding tightly to their possessions as if their lives depended on them. Parents desperately tried to shield their children, but no amount of money or success could protect them from the growing chaos. They are spiritually blind, Jesus continued. They see their world falling apart, but they don't know where to turn. Tell them to turn to me. I am the only foundation that cannot be shaken. His voice carried deep sorrow. The enemy has used comfort to keep them blind. Now that their comfort is gone, they must make a choice. Trust me or trust the world. I saw white families crying out in desperation, searching for answers. But I also saw others turning to Jesus, kneeling in prayer, opening their hearts for the first time in years. Those who turn to me will find peace, Jesus said, but those who continue placing their trust in the world will be lost. Then Jesus showed me something that disturbed me deeply, the way success and wealth had become a trap, especially in white communities. I saw rows of beautiful homes with perfectly maintained lawns. Families drove luxury cars, sent their children to the best schools, and had more than enough in their bank accounts. From the outside, their lives looked ideal. But beneath the surface, the reality was very different. Inside those homes, there was no true peace. I saw couples barely speaking at the dinner table, their faces worn with exhaustion and emptiness. I saw children surrounded by expensive toys and gadgets, yet starving for love and connection. They have mistaken comfort for peace, Jesus said. They believe that having more will fill the emptiness inside them, but the soul cannot be nourished by material things. Then Jesus showed me how success itself had become a form of bondage. I saw men working long, exhausting 12-hour shifts in corporate offices, relentlessly climbing the career ladder, chasing promotions, and seeking recognition. They were drained, stressed, overworked, and barely holding on. Yet, they kept pushing forward, convinced that success would eventually bring them happiness. I saw women meticulously curating their appearances and perfecting their homes, ensuring every detail looked picture-perfect for social media. They smiled for the camera, but the moment the photos were taken, their expressions faded, revealing exhaustion, sadness, and emptiness. "They're chasing an illusion," Jesus said. "The enemy has deceived them into believing that success equals happiness. But the more they gain, the more they lose." I saw people going to church, but for all the wrong reasons. Some were there just to network or maintain appearances. Others treated church as nothing more than a weekly social gathering rather than a place to truly seek God. Their prayers lacked sincerity, and their worship felt empty, just a routine, not a heartfelt connection. "Their hearts are far from me," Jesus said with sadness. "They've placed their trust in their own strength, their own achievements, instead of trusting in me." He then showed me how the relentless pursuit of success was tearing families apart. I saw a young man sitting alone in his car after work, his face buried in his hands, crying because the pressure had become unbearable. He had everything society told him he needed: a high-paying job, a beautiful house, yet inside, he felt completely empty. Then I saw how success had become a source of pride. People who had wealth and status began looking down on those who had less, believing that their achievements somehow made them superior or more valuable. But in the pursuit of success, they had lost something far greater. Jesus revealed their hearts to me, cold, hardened, and lacking compassion. Their identity wasn't built on faith, but on their wealth and possessions. "They have gained everything the world has to offer," Jesus said, "but in the process, they have lost their souls." Then, he showed me how this deception was spreading. Social media, advertising, and modern culture all pushed the lie that success leads to happiness. But no matter how much people accumulated, the emptiness inside remained. "They are starving spiritually," Jesus said, "and they don't even realize it." Next, he showed me another layer of deception, the division among races. I saw how the enemy had used race as a weapon, stirring up hatred and separation. White communities were disconnected from black and brown communities, each side growing suspicious of the other. Fear, resentment, and misunderstanding spread between them like a thick, creeping fog. Jesus took me to a large city where white and black families lived in the same neighborhoods, but barely spoke. Their children attended the same schools, but an unspoken tension hung between them. I saw white parents pulling their children away from playgrounds when black children arrived. I saw black children being left out of birthday parties and neighborhood gatherings. "They have let the enemy divide them," Jesus said. "But in my kingdom, there is no separation." Then, he showed me something even more heartbreaking, how this division had seeped into the church. I saw black and white churches in the same communities, yet they remained distant from one another. They worshipped the same God, but stayed in their own separate spaces, unwilling to bridge the gap. "The enemy thrives on division," Jesus said. "As long as my people are divided, they will remain weak." Jesus showed me how bitterness had taken root over generations. I saw the pain caused by racism, injustice, and inequality, deep wounds that had never truly healed. Instead of seeking unity, people clung to their resentment. "Forgiveness is the key," Jesus said, "not because injustice should be ignored, but because bitterness poisons the soul." I saw how unforgiveness had hardened hearts. White communities held on to pride and a sense of superiority, while black communities held on to anger and mistrust. The division had become more than just social, it was spiritual. They have forgotten that they are all my children, Jesus said. True unity cannot come from politics or social programs. It can only come through me. Then, he gave me a glimpse of what could happen if unity was restored. I saw white and black families coming together in prayer, helping one another, sharing meals. Churches opened their doors to everyone, welcoming all regardless of race or background. As love and understanding spread, the darkness of division began to lift. This is what the enemy fears most, Jesus said. When my people stand together in unity, nothing can stop them. After revealing the beauty of unity, Jesus' expression became serious. The enemy won't give up that easily, he said. Suddenly the scene changed. I saw cities in turmoil, protests, violence, and confusion everywhere. People were desperate, fighting over food, shelter, and safety. Governments were failing, economies were crumbling, and fear drove people to turn against each other. What's happening? I asked. The systems of this world are collapsing, Jesus replied, and many will lose everything they put their trust in. I watched as leaders scrambled to restore order. They introduced new systems, digital identification, a cashless economy, and centralized control. They promised these changes would bring stability and peace, but it was a deception. This is how the enemy will introduce the mark, Jesus warned. First through fear, then through control. At first, people accepted these changes willingly, desperate for security. But they didn't realize that by doing so, they were surrendering their freedom. They will believe it's the answer, Jesus said, but it's actually a trap. I saw families torn apart. Those who refused to comply were shut out of society. They couldn't buy food. They couldn't access medical care. They couldn't send their children to school. Faith will be tested, Jesus said. Many will fall away, but those who stand firm will be protected. Then he showed me the way forward, faith. I saw a small group of believers standing together in prayer. Darkness surrounded them, yet their faith created a circle of light around them. Though the world was falling apart, they were safe. Faith, Jesus said, is the only way through this. Jesus showed me how faith has the power to break the cycle of poverty and division. When people placed their trust in him rather than in governments or money, they discovered a deep sense of peace, even in the midst of chaos. I watched as people shared their food, helped one another, and stood firm, even when the world seemed to be against them. They had no wealth, no social status, nothing by worldly standards, but they had peace. They have chosen me, Jesus said, and I will never abandon them. I saw miracles happening. People who had lost everything were being provided for in ways that defied logic. Food multiplied, the sick were healed, and danger passed them by, as if the rules of the world no longer applied to them. The systems of this world will fail, Jesus said, but my kingdom will last forever. I saw fear lose its grip on people as they placed their trust completely in Jesus. Their faces were filled with strength and peace, not because they had material things, but because they knew they had him. Tell them, Jesus said. Tell them to build their lives on me, not on money, not on governments, not on success. Faith is the only foundation that cannot be shaken. Then Jesus showed me something I would never forget, the spiritual state of both the rich and the poor. At first, it seemed like an unusual comparison. They lived in completely different worlds, yet spiritually, their struggles were surprisingly similar. The vision began in a crowded city. I saw homeless people lying on the streets, wrapped in thin blankets, their hands trembling from the cold. Their faces were tired, their bodies weak. But beyond their suffering, I saw something unexpected, a quiet light flickering within them. Despite their hardships, many of them had peace. Some were praying, others were helping each other, sharing the little they had. Their spirits were wounded, but not broken. "Do you see?" Jesus asked. "Yes, Lord," I answered, though I was still trying to understand. "They have nothing, yet they have peace." "They are poor in the world's eyes," Jesus said, "but rich in spirit. Because they have nothing else to rely on, they have learned to depend on me, and because of that, their hearts remain open to my presence." Then, the vision shifted. I walked through wealthy neighborhoods, past grand houses with sprawling yards. Inside, I saw families gathered around long dining tables overflowing with food. The fathers were absorbed in financial reports, the mothers scrolled through their phones, and the children played with expensive toys. But something was missing. The light in their souls was dim. "They have everything," Jesus said, "yet inside they are starving." Then, I saw a wealthy man alone in a high-rise office, gazing over the city skyline. He wore an expensive suit, and his watch alone cost more than most people earned in a year. But his face was weary, his eyes hollow. There was an emptiness in him, a deep void that neither money nor success could fill. "He has built his life on sand," Jesus said. "He trusts in wealth and power, but his soul is withering." I saw another wealthy family sitting together in a lavish living room. The children were glued to their tablets, the parents lost in their phones. They were in the same room, but completely disconnected. Their eyes were cold, their hearts distant. "They have gained the world," Jesus said, "but they have lost their souls." Then, Jesus showed me something different. A wealthy man kneeling beside his bed, his suit discarded, tears streaming down his face as he prayed. A light began to glow within him. "Faith," Jesus said. "Even among the rich, faith is the key. When they let go of their attachment to wealth and turn to me, I will heal them." The scene shifted again. I saw white and black families praying together. I saw the rich and the poor sitting side by side in a small church, hands clasped, voices united in prayer. Their souls radiated light. "True wealth is not measured by what you own," Jesus said. "It is measured by the condition of your soul. Those who trust in me, rich or poor, will have peace." Jesus stopped walking and turned to me. His expression was both sorrowful and hopeful. His eyes were gentle but serious. I felt the weight of the words he was about to speak. "My child," he said, "the world is entering a time of great deception and division. Many will lose faith. Many will fall away. But my people, those who know me, will never be abandoned." Jesus lifted his hand, and in an instant the future unfolded before my eyes. I saw families on the brink of financial ruin, banks shutting down, grocery store shelves completely empty. People stood in long lines for food, some desperate, others filled with anger. Governments tried to restore order, but nothing was working. Fear spread like wildfire, turning people against each other. Then Jesus spoke gently. "Look." In the middle of all the chaos, I saw a small group of people gathered in prayer. They had little. Some had lost everything. But their faces remained calm. Hand in hand, they sang hymns, their voices steady and full of faith. While the world around them crumbled, peace surrounded them. "They are mine," Jesus said softly. "To the world, they have nothing. But they have me, and that is enough." Then I saw miracles unfold before me. Food multiplying, the sick being healed, families finding shelter where none seemed to exist. A radiant light surrounded them, and I saw angels standing guard, protecting them from harm. "The enemy will try to use fear to control them," Jesus said, "but those who trust in me will not be shaken." I saw churches filled with people on their knees in prayer, hands lifted high in worship. Those who had once put their faith in wealth and success were now crying out to Jesus, and he was answering them. "In these last days, I will pour out my Spirit," Jesus said. "Miracles, signs, and wonders will follow, but those still clinging to the world's ways will struggle to see it.